I moved to South Dakota about 5 years ago. It was the first time I'd ever lived alone, and honestly, it was long overdue. My parents had been on my case for years about getting out of the house, and I finally caved. I'm not exactly a social butterfly, so the idea of living somewhere secluded actually appealed to me. The house I found was in one of the snowier parts of the state, tucked away on a stretch of land where the nearest neighbor was a solid walk away. I was fine by me. For the most part, that's exactly what I got. The first few years were uneventful in the best way possible. I kept to myself, went to work, came home, and didn't bother anyone. I never introduced myself to any of the neighbors, partly because I'm just not that kind of person, and partly because there wasn't much of a reason to. The houses were so spread apart, you could go weeks without seeing another soul. Everything changed one afternoon in early February. I was at work when the snow started coming down. At first, it was nothing unusual, but within an hour, it escalated into something else entirely. The wind picked up, visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the roads started getting dangerous. Eventually, my boss told everyone to head home before conditions got worse. I drive a lifted truck, so I wasn't too worried. I've driven through bad weather before, and it's always handled it well. Still, there were parts of the drive that made me uneasy. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was relieved to be home. But when I went to unlock my front door, I realized it was frozen solid. I tried again, nothing. I didn't have anything to generate heat, so I tried breathing on it, cupping my hands around it, even banging on it out of frustration. Nothing worked. I sat back in my truck with the heater blasting, telling myself I'd just wait it out. But after 10 minutes, the snow was falling harder, and my truck was already half buried. Even with the lift, I doubted I could get out again. Driving wasn't an option anymore. I didn't know my neighbors. My parents were hours away, and staying in the truck overnight wasn't realistic. Eventually, I accepted the only option I had left. I was going to have to walk to the nearest house. It was about a quarter-mile away, and by the time I reached it, I was shivering uncontrollably. The house was small, one story, and clearly in rough shape. I knocked loudly. After a minute, the door flew open so hard I stepped back. The man standing there looked about 50, with a completely unremarkable face. He stared at me for a moment, then introduced himself as Joe. I explained my situation. He nodded slowly and stepped aside to let me in. I should have felt relieved, but something about him felt off. He offered me a seat on the couch and sat across from me in a worn-out armchair. We made small talk, or at least I tried to. He answered questions, but his attention was never fully on me. His eyes darted around the room, like he couldn't focus on anything. Mid-sentence, he'd trail off and stare at the wall. Eventually, I told him I was exhausted and asked if I could sleep. He seemed relieved, told me I could crash on the couch. I asked to turn off the light. He did, but he didn't leave. He stood in the doorway, motionless, for what felt like a full minute. I pretended to fall asleep. Finally, he walked down the hallway. I tried to sleep, but something felt wrong. About an hour later, I started hearing thumping and scraping sounds above me. The house was one story. Then there was a loud thump that made me sit upright. Joe was standing in the doorway again, watching me. Before I could speak, he charged. He jumped over the couch and tackled me, trying to put me in a chokehold. He screamed at me to stop fighting, talking about her and how she was lonely and how I'd be good company. I finally shoved him off, grabbed my coat, and ran. Behind me, I heard him scream something like, "She's not gonna be happy." I didn't stop running until I reached the next house. The couple who answered, Kathy and Brandon, pulled me inside immediately. The next morning, Brandon asked if the man was Joe. Apparently, Joe's wife had disappeared years earlier. No body, no investigation. I reported everything to the police, but nothing ever came of it. I still live in the same house. Nothing has happened since, but I still get a bad feeling every time I drive past Joe's place.